Hello and welcome to another episode of the Testing Peers. I'm joined tonight by Russell.
Hello.
David.
Hello.
And unfortunately no Chris. I'm sure we'll cope without him.
Boo.
This podcast is kindly sponsored by Saffron QA. Saffron QA is a provider of recruitment and consultancy services exclusively for the software testing industry. More details can be found in the show notes and on our website. Tonight we're going to talk about the very fun topic of defect management. All the fun we've had over the years with the numbers of defects we've dealt with. Before we dive into that though, guys, what's the most annoying defect you found in a real life, everyday life product?
Oh, good question. I guess I can tell you the one I found today. I'm sorting. I really hate bad sorting. You know, it's a weird one, I admit. But if you're trying to do something, you ask it to an e-commerce website or something these days, and you click sort by price or sort by something else. And it does it, but then it sticks loads and loads of marketing almost ones in between with, let's say, sort by price. And suddenly I'll use an example, Auto Trader today. And there's suddenly a recommended one, and then there is a bumped up one, and then there's another one. And actually, you're scrolling through it, and actually 3 out of the 5 cars aren't actually in any order whatsoever. It's all random.
Yes, I have experienced that one as well, where you search by geography and then you get one that's 400 miles away as the number one pick.
Yeah, so anything that kind of you use the filters or you use the sort of the ordering things, and it does ignores them, or it's so badly done. I can understand having one thrown in somewhere, maybe, and it's highlighted quite obviously, it's kind of thrown in there to highlight it. But when it's just in the list and you can't really distinguish it, that's kind of a defect to me, because usability-wise, it just makes me not want to go to that app. It really turns me off using it. And in fact, I did stop using that app for that exact reason. That's kind of the most pressing defect I've come across, and it builds my frustration up. I want to do something, I go to a tool, and it just makes my life harder, and it just makes me want to turn off from that. And I'm guessing it's by design. That's the thing that annoys me more than anything else. This is a deliberate attempt to promote things that just sends me the direction. I consider that a defect in my world.
Yeah, I would agree with that one. David, any thoughts?
Well, I've got a couple actually. So one thing is inconsistency in, again, it's similar to sorting, but it's alphabetical order, or the way that names are introduced. So we've got our finance system for doing our timesheets, which is ranked by surname for the employees. And then we've got Lotus Notes, we still use that, which obviously ranks by first name. So, and often the people who report to me, I know by their first names, and I don't always use their surname. So it's really annoying having everything ranked by surname in the finance system, because I have to put those extra levels in of remembering what their actual surname is. My second one is, again, a similar thing, is filtering on websites. Whenever we try and filter on particular things, it's never quite the ones you want, and they're vaguely done by range of price or, you know, brand name or whatever. But sometimes, and again, going to Russell's example, sometimes it says whether they're in stock or not, and the website says they're in stock, and then you go and pay for them, as my daughter found out today, and then it says, oh no, you can't have it, it's out of stock. And then you go back to the website and it still says it's in stock, and you go through, no, you can't have it. And it just causes frustration and annoyance and disappointment for my daughter.
When you say systems that know they can manage their stock inventory better, it's really frustrating for those sites that don't, or that let you purchase it even and then send you the emails afterwards. They're sort of really annoying. And on that same theme, I guess this is more a complaint about UX now, I think, to a degree, but only 3 more in stock. And then you buy 3 and there's still 3 more in stock.
Yeah, that's a marketing ploy, apparently.
It is.
Yes.
Apparently it encourages more users to buy things of this.
Well, I suppose if people think they're onto the last few, well, it's like any bargain. If anyone sees a discount, then they immediately think they're onto a good thing.
From a simple point of view, though, if you subtract 3 from 3, you should get 0. Therefore, in my head, there's a defect with your software, because it's not subtracted the correct amount of items from your
Very
stock.
true.
But I completely agree. It's deliberately done, and it is a marketing point. But from me, when I first saw it, it was like, you got a bug. Oh, no, you haven't. You're just being evil. I don't like you.
I don't know if it links back to the anchoring that we've talked about on previous episodes, but we seem to all talked about similar things, because my example is maybe not with the filtering or the sorting of an app, but it is with a system such as Amazon, where you have to do lots of filtering and stuff like that. My frustration is the in-app notifications or the app notifications on an iPhone when it says your thing's out for delivery. And especially if you've got your screen using for something else. So if you're watching something or you've got it set as your sat nav in your car, the pop-up comes down from the top, says this thing's being delivered. And like every other app, it goes away. With the Amazon app, it stays there. And you have to physically move it yourself to get rid of it. And for me, that's a big frustration, especially when I'm driving and I've got my sat nav on and I don't really want to have to touch the screen in any way while I'm driving. And then this big notification comes up and takes up half the screen because it's telling you your delivery's out.
So you just reminded me of another one, which is pertinent for this time. You know, the COVID app in the UK,
yes.
And how it kind of pops up saying you've been near somebody who blah, 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 and then vanishes and there's no more trace of it ever at all. And their solution to fixing that defect was to put another message up which says, don't worry about it. Because it's kind of embedded into the software and what Apple and others have provided them, they can't change that. So therefore, their solution is, it's like saying, oh yeah, we didn't subtract 3, but don't worry, we've taken 3 out of stock, don't worry. It's kind of working around the defect, which I give them credit for their pragmatism. But at the same time, it is quite amusing. But in real life, I guess when we manage defects, sometimes the solution isn't fixing it. Sometimes it is the pragmatist way.
That is true. And that leads very nicely onto our topic for this evening. Very good. Very well done, Russell.
Trying to be Chris.
Trying to be Chris. We haven't got the glue here tonight, so bear with us. So yeah, defects. What's your experience? Have you had some good experience with how you've managed defects, looked at defects in your careers?
Certainly had to do it a lot. It's something as a tester that you can't really escape.
Indeed.
I think every place I've worked has got a different system, but they're always kind of a similar. You prioritize them, you work with different people to decide what to do, and then you work to get them into backlogs and other things. I've worked predominantly Agile, so it's conversations. I think when it's going smoothly, and I think certainly in my experience, a lot are quite smooth in terms of prioritizing them, agreeing with them, deciding what to do. The problems with defect management I've always found are the times where disagreement or where you go as a tester, this is catastrophic, you could be losing data. And then someone goes, it's fine, it's only an email address or something like that. Hopefully it's not email address because that would be bad, but you get the idea when it's just, it's just a postcode or something, small in relation to other things. Those debates are always where I think it always gets interesting, and debates about priority of them. Everyone can label them a priority, but it's actually then the action to resolve them and work through resolving them and getting them dealt with. That's usually the most complicated part of defect management. I think we can all sit in a room or all sit in a desk and put numbers against things. That I think is relatively easy. Agreeing them is harder, but then the actual actions is always the hardest. That's my general overview anyway.
I have to agree. I think the way that defects are managed is quite tricky. I've been in Russell's place before where I think that a particular issue is a showstopper and products shouldn't go out. However, when you talk to the developers or whatever, they go, oh no, it's only a minor thing. We can still run with that. It'll be fine. And the other thing that I think sometimes you have trouble with in defect management is when the volume of defects overloads the system that you've got. And I think that's a real problem, especially if you've got a triaging system or something and someone's away.
Yeah.
And so therefore there is a blockage or there's someone there with the skill set that can tell the severity or the priority of that particular bug, and so there is a delay. So therefore then it has a knock-on effect on both what the initial diagnosis of the bug and then obviously the subsequent work that's necessary to rectify it.
Out of curiosity, have many of you kind of worked in places where you almost have a formal person or group that defect triages or prioritize everything? Or have you kind of gone the more agile, anyone's allowed to, and then it's kind of sense checked later? I guess, which way round have you guys done?
I've experienced both. In my first role, we were only really paying lip service to Agile. We had Bugzilla as a bug tool, and we had defect manager, the test manager, the QA manager, whatever they want to be called, was effectively a defect manager as well. And they ran any bug that was raised, they ran triage sessions on it with a group of people. They'd make sure certain fields were filled in as part of the defect, and they'd log it, and then they'd track these defects through. I remember being like a month or so in, and we were in a place where we had defect backlogs that weren't getting touched. That must have been in the hundreds, maybe even in the thousands of defects that had just not been touched for cycle upon cycle. And we were being told these defects were still valid, that we had to keep them in because one day we would get to them, and some of them were 10 years old. So we took a decision at one point, right, anything older than that date, we're just going to delete. And you would not believe the amount of kickoff we got from people within the business that said, no, we can't. That we might need to get that to that one day. And these are bugs that were linked to how something performed on Windows 98 or something like this. And you're like, well, Windows 98 is out of support now. We're not going to worry about how it works on Windows 98. Let's just get rid of it. Let's get our backlog down to a list of defects that actually we care about and that stand a chance of getting into a future release.
When you talk about deleting these things, do you actually mean the physical act of deletion, so there's no record of them ever, or is it almost
No,
like an archive?
it's marking them as closed in the
Okay.
tool. We had Bugzilla and it was just a closed field or whatever, resolved
Okay.
closed or whatever.
There's different ways of doing that, and
Sorry, yeah, you're right. There was 2 stages, and this is another thing that I'll talk about in a minute, is the process, the defect flow. When you resolved a defect, there was a resolved field, and then there was a reason why you resolved it, and there was a resolve fixed, resolve will not fix, resolve rejected, blah, 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 blah.
Yep.
And if you put things in like will not fix, you then have to put justification as to why.
Okay.
So we went through these thousands of defects and literally had to blanket call them all will not fix due to age.
too old. Yeah.
Too old, yeah, basically. At the time, one of the defects we could have mentioned earlier, there wasn't a way of block doing that. So you couldn't do a block at any one point. You had to do every single individual defect at a time.
It's a fun job.
So these 3-hour meetings where we're going through defect triage, trust me, my life was that fun. It was literally, that's another one that's over 10 years old. Let's just delete it. Let's just, will not fix, will not fix. Anyone fancy getting me a coffee? Will not fix, will not fix. That kind of meeting. But that leads on to the process flow as well.
So go on, tell us about the process flow, because it's clearly brings back memories.
He's going to have flashbacks.
I'm struggling already. I'm starting to shake. It was just a case of, I've now been in a test leadership position. I'm going through the process at the moment of working out how we can simplify our defect flow in Jira and how we can reduce it down to literally having 3 or 4 stages of, it's open, it's in dev, it's in test, it's fixed or whatever, and a couple of scenarios around it. There was so many points where it had to be checked. I'm trying to think of the examples now, but there was a stage when it's raised, there was then an in triage. There was then a in dev. There was then it's been rejected by dev, reason why, or has been it just felt like the whole flow it was a monstrous diagram. The process flow was huge and it could have been simplified. And actually in its role since then as well, the team spent a good 2 months defining the process flow for defects. And again, it's signed off by several layers of people to try and make sure it was right. And I'm sitting there going, just simplify it. These defects, we're spending more time worrying about the process around them than actually the defects themselves. In the time we spent worrying about this process, we could have fixed 20 of the defects. I sometimes feel that there's a culture around defects.
Yeah.
That defects are important. Again, going back to earlier roles where defects were used as a way of gaming the system, because the QA team had a sort of a metric that was measured about how many defects they raised each week. So people were raising defects for the sake of raising defects. They were raising defects based because a full stop should have been in a certain place on the website or in the app, or the text wasn't quite the right size or color. Things that wouldn't matter if we actually were testing it fully.
Yeah. Or if you worked in conjunction with the team, you wouldn't
exactly
raise a bug. You just fix it quick.
And they were also buddying up with developers who were deliberately injecting defects into the code, so that they could then give the defect to them to say, there you go, that will make sure you hit your quota for the week. Here's a couple of defects I've injected in for you.
Anyone listening, this is why you don't measure testing quality by measuring defects.
Yes.
Because that is naturally what happens to people.
Yes. You will pick every single thing out rather than put them in separately, just to make sure that you have your numbers. And unfortunately, that then swells the whole bug tracking
and this
system,
is how we got to the problem we had,
makes
with the
it
thousands of defects.
And also the other difficulty about that is the fact that sometimes if you produce lots of bugs in a row, you can sometimes miss important information. If they're seen in isolation, it doesn't actually make any sense. It has to be seen in correlation with other things.
Well, I'll give you an example of one that I remember vividly that was one issue, one code functional problem, but it happened on every Windows OS. So guess what the person did? They raised an individual defect for every Windows OS. So there must have been 7 or 8, because there was 32-bit, 64-bit, there was Windows Server 2008 R2 as well as R1. Every single Windows OS they raise a separate defect for. So you've got 12 defects per one functional issue. So it's great for the developer because when he fixes it, he's fixed 12 defects in one go, and that makes him look good. The culture was all wrong. And actually, that culture Russell touched on at the beginning, where it's more agile, where there's a much more communication importance around defect, and actually it isn't about, oh, we need to raise this in the system. It's actually more about, let's just get it fixed. Yes, you might need to keep track of the defects in some form, but you minimize the detail that's in there, and you spend more time working out the problem, resolving it in the right way, not making a quick hack, but actually fixing it properly. The care is in the product rather than the process of raising the defects.
You do raise an interesting point, though, with the sort of number of minor bugs, with the sort of full stops and formatting, is that sometimes when we come to product release, the number of minor bugs can make the product really annoying for the end user. And although you're looking at all the major bugs, whatever, but a multitude of minor bugs can build up to be a major turn-off, a bit like we were talking about in websites with auto trade or whatever. If it doesn't work properly and you'll get frustrated with it, you will switch off and not use it.
Yeah, I must admit, in the Agile teams I've worked in, to go to Simon's point about kind of the workflow, it's the same workflow as any other ticket, apart from it's a type bug usually. It doesn't have any other process. Where I've worked, I've tried to encourage the team to prioritize with stakeholders and things how important that bug is. Testers generally go, it's massively important or not, but then they generally have a follow-up conversation. And as Simon said, the culture is collaborate together, and only in rare occasions is there disagreement. Most people found the common ground. In the kind of production system problems, then that's where we ended up with a triage process put in place because we couldn't manage the quality of the defects. Certainly I found that when an Agile team, Scrum team in particular, to say, let's say the quality of the defects weren't good enough, well, you're a self-performing sort of team, you're there to help each other, feedback loops quickly, get the developers telling the testers, well, in fact, you didn't tell me what operating system makes my life harder. Could you do that in future? Yeah, sure. It allows it to evolve to be good enough, and I've generally avoided specifying to the nth degree anything around what is the minimum for a team in a bug, and as they're going. I have specified you're not going to fix it there and then or in that day, and you probably should keep track of it.
Yeah,
that's about as much guidance as I've generally given. I've avoided it. But the live system bugs, I've had Simon's problem. I had 1,000. I had to close loads, and I did them one by one. And I reviewed them to make sure that they weren't major and we hadn't missed them. That was not a fun process. It was better, but then I think by the time I finished, we'd gone from 1,000 to 200.
Yeah,
which is much more likely to fix. And
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, a few of those in each release or whatever. Yeah, fine.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
But also, like we're saying about the number of defects, if you get too many, you can get lost in the process, and you can have the ability to miss important ones because it just gets lost in the noise. And you do have to keep control and keep a low number, or move a couple of out in order to make sure that you can concentrate and control what's actually being fixed.
I wish we reviewed them before we got to the point where we reviewed them, when we got to 1,000, because we found some ones we should have fixed, but because no one had shouted, we hadn't. And again, that perpetuates the culture of if you shout loud, you get your thing fixed. It's a whole different ball game that I'll probably not go into here.
Yeah,
it's easy to miss one when you have lots, and that's the challenge. And it is about balancing them. Those 1,000 were distributed across 17 teams. It wasn't one team with 1,000, luckily. But it's very easy to miss your backlog or to forget. Agile backlog management is a classic case of if you're not good at it, then they grow to huge, huge things. And there's kind of an art in helping product owners manage those backlogs, including removing old defects, including removing old stories that was, for this project that we did in 2016, it was going to do this, but we haven't done it yet. A lot of software allows you to set, as Simon said, mark it as won't do. You don't have to delete it entirely. You can just remove it from view.
Yeah.
I definitely encourage good sort of maintenance of defects and stories or anything else to get rid of dead wood, because as David has said, you can see the wood for the trees then.
Something I've always tried to do as well is, as you say, David, when you've got lots of defects, especially minor defects that can impact the overall quality system, is trying to, even though they're minor, visualize where those defects are and how they're impacting the system. And if you can see a cluster that are impacting one particular area, then actually they might all be minor individually, but together, collectively, they are an issue that could cause a customer some pain. So let's do something about those. Let's raise one more higher severity, higher priority ticket, link them all to it, fix that one, find the solution, and solve the problem if that's the case. I sometimes think, as you mentioned earlier, Russell, it's pragmatism with defects. It's actually what is the best way forward for the customer, for the development process, for the product.
Yeah, I've always relied, hopefully, on the testers within the team to say, look, if you're seeing lots of them and we're not fixing them, tell us, because your eyes are better than the ability to look at that 1,000 list. We did group things, but you can't group things to the user journey necessarily as easily. You can, but you can get hundreds and it's hard to link it to multiple. So if you see lots of little defects as you're going through things, tell us, and then we realize that actually the combined journey isn't great. You know, you've got a spelling mistake here, you've got a slight different coloring here, you've got a drop down that doesn't quite fit on page here, you've got a little bit of overlapping text here. That's the journey you've got. You don't look like you've got a good product. So you need to start fixing them. Each one of those I wouldn't have as a critical bug. I would have them I should be fixing. And obviously, but the 4 of them says, oh, I've got to make an improvement here. And again, it helps drive conversations. And I've sat down with product owners many times to kind of help them drive quality in their products. I think it's the best way I can phrase it. And they generally listen because they care 60% of the time. Sometimes they have other priorities. And it is that pragmatism about, okay, getting this shipped is fine. Next sprint, perhaps, maybe you can do quite a few more bugs than you have this sprint. We did an evil thing where we said that we expected every sprint to at least contain 1 production bug. If it didn't, you had to come and speak to me, and I wasn't a nice person always. I know it's hard to believe.
Can't believe that for a second.
Generally, they did it. They often overachieved that. They often did 2 or 3.
Another thing we've got to think about is actually the quality of the actual bug reports in themselves, or the issue reports, and the consistency. We're talking about recognizing clusters and things. If there isn't consistency in tagging where it is found, or what operating system or whatever details is necessary for that, or even just a good description of it, that can take so much more time in the triaging or identifying those areas that can be a problem and have a cluster inside them.
Yeah, and especially in the case where if the defects aren't fixed straight away, if they've got no information in there, then it's going to be closed and then nothing's going to be done with it if there's not enough information to make a decision. I go back to when I was first starting out as a tester back in 2010. I had a very good, I think I've mentioned before, a very good mentor at the time that was all about making sure that we documented our processes and documented everything we found. People would come back and know exactly what we were thinking at the time. And he had this template for defects within Bugzilla that I stuck to the whole time I was in that role. Then from then on, it was quite a detailed thing. It made sure you had numbered steps for steps to reproduce, that you put enough detail in that anyone could know which operating system, know anything else to do with the system that was in place was set up correctly, that you were doing this at the exact point. It was very, very detailed, and it made me become very thorough, and it helped me learn more about my exploratory testing process and how I document that as well. So learning how to be thorough at that point led on to other things later on. But it surprised me when I then started exploring the outer community and learning more about testing outside of my company, because I was in that bubble where everything we did in testing in our company was the only way testing was done.
We've all been there.
And it wasn't even what testing in other teams within the same company did, but you're in that bubble. You think that's the only way things are done. And you start realizing that people didn't raise defects in the same way, that people didn't pay the same much attention to the defect detail. So I guess my question there is then, what is the right detail?
I'll give you a pragmatic answer again if you want.
It's going to be, it depends, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, absolutely.
We did a lot of training with that. Bugs that we fixed slowly, which were generally production bugs, because the system had already gone out, unless it was just recently released. Those sort of defects. We trained a lot of our kind of support teams to raise the sort of bugs, as you mentioned, with steps to reproduce, screenshots, as much detail as possible, earmark what it is, tell us what the customer impact is. Just say it doesn't work. Does that stop them doing something that's really, really important? Because I may read it and think it doesn't, but if you tell me, then I can help prioritize it better. We've done a lot of training with those sort of guys on that sort of area. The ones in Sprint, as I said before, we just did whatever's enough. You own this, you did the work, and you should be fixing it before it's released. We kind of had the whole don't introduce any bugs. There were exceptions. There definitely wasn't a zero tolerance. It was just, if you do, you need to call it out, tell us and explain it. And the process to get it out with the bugs was harder than the process to get it out without bugs. So they often fix them whilst they were doing it. And that's kind of how we did it, I guess. I think it is a pragmatism. Depending on the type of bug, is it going to last forever? If it's going to be fixed tomorrow, do less notes. But you can only do that if you have a culture where it's common that you fix things fast and fix other things slow. If we put them on a backlog, spend a week in a triage meeting, then that approach would definitely not work for you. You'd have to get detail earlier and it would be slower. I guess that's why I don't advocate lots of defect management review meetings and things like that. Avoid them if you can.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I think I've spent far too much time recently discussing defect priority definitions and what each priority means and how we communicate that to everybody within the organization, because in my current role, it's a very large company and very split into different areas, and every team has their own definitions, every team has their own process, and it's trying to centralize that process in some respects and everyone having the same definitions, which is next to impossible.
Yeah, the question if it's needed.
Well, absolutely. This is it. We need to make sure, certainly in my areas, where the only real area where defects are actually checked and looked at is the end-to-end integration stage. You've got the sprint teams, they do all their bits, they fix all their defects. There's very few defects that make it out of the sprint into the integration stage. It's then that end-to-end integration where lots of bits come together. You're running a series of regression tests for a couple of weeks, you raise your defects, and then you go around again, you fix them, and then it's at the end you report how many defects are left outstanding, and then it's that when you have the discussion. Yeah. That's the only point in the whole process, end-to-end, from when projects can conceptualize, where defects matter, where we've got 3 P2s left open. What are they? Yeah. Can we live with it? Have we got workarounds in place? Are the customers going to be impacted? Yes, they are. Right, we need to fix them. Yeah. That kind of discussion. I'm happy to have those discussions at that point, but really we should have fixed them all earlier.
But I think if you've got a process like that, I think you end up having more detail in those bugs because the turnaround iterative time of fixing them is not that day, that week. You've generally got to go back to the team who's moved on for a week or two. Yeah. So your flow has got to be different. And it makes sense that it depends, as we said earlier.
Every team does things differently. So, yeah.
David, what's your thoughts?
I agree. It depends on the context, which seems to be another of our catchphrases.
It does, doesn't it?
And especially in the company I work for, there are so many different projects we work on. So we do work on Agile, we do work on V-model. The thing that I would say is whichever way it should be done, the tester should talk to the developer at any point, to get their point of view, to find out where the defect is likely to be, how severe it is, and how much detail the developer will need in order to fix it. Because there may be log, and it depends on the severity again as to how soon it is. So therefore, if it's going to be a long-term fix, you need more evidence to show where you actually find it and the steps that were actually done. It's the communication between the developers and the testers, irrespective of the type of methodology you're using, that's the most important thing.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Definitely communication is the number one thing.
Agreed. There you go. Something we all agree on.
For a change.
Yeah, makes a change. Probably now time to say adieu. So, goodbye. Thank you very much for listening to us talk about defect management. If you want to give us some feedback, feel free to reach out to us at contact@testingpeers.com or our Twitter handle, testingpeers. And feel free to help us, support us at Patreon. But thank you very much for listening to us, and we look forward to you tuning in again next time.
For now, it's goodbye from the Testing Peers.
Goodbye.